Good morning, friends. David Wright here, and I am your host of the Disruptive Innovators Champions of Digital Business podcast. And today I am lucky enough to be joined by my friend Maruf Haider. Maruf, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too, man. I always really appreciate our conversations, so it's good to get you on the podcast. For just to start, for those of our listeners who may not be familiar, do you mind just sharing a little bit about your current role?
Yeah. From a role perspective, I'm an associate chief medical information officer for digital and virtual health of a large integrated health system in Virginia called Carilion Clinic. Partners with Virginia Tech as an academic partner. I also help shape the health system's IT strategy with a small group of leaders. More broadly, though, I really see my work as that of a physician executive. I like to say I'm focused on scaling care through innovative ways. And information technology is kind of in the title, but I think it's more about the innovative ways of scaling that care rather than just the tech. And really, it's about keeping patients and clinicians at the center. Um, Another way to say it is like the Venn diagram version. Like I like to use that. I like the Venn diagrams, by the way. I don't know if you right.
Mm.
I operate at the intersection of healthcare, technology, and leadership. Um, and most interested in the innovation that actually survives the reality of the health system.
Right, right. Well, and I appreciate starting there. Just I was talking about a Venn diagram earlier this morning, so very relevant.
I love Venn diagrams.
B, when we talk about the proper operationalizing of technology, or I should say successful operationalizing of technology, it starts with people, process, methodology. Like it starts with understanding. And I know that that's how you lead. And I think, and it's funny that you mentioned leadership, right? Because I think one of the areas that's sorely lacking in digital transformation, right, which is an overused term, but I think it's all encompassing of what we've been trying to accomplish for the last 20 years and what we're trying to accomplish now. But getting back to the leadership component, the fact that leadership skills as digital executives have been lacking, right? By way of like, maybe we've been invited to the table now. And I know, like, you're a doctor, right?
Correct. Yes.
So
I'm an
you
internist by
come,
background, hospitalist medicine. It's been the majority of my career. I see patients
mm,
virtually now for the most part.
right, coming at it from a different angle, which I actually really appreciate. Like I've really appreciated as I've become friends with more and more chief medical officers, CMIOs, et cetera, et cetera. And you guys have stepped into roles like Alistair Erskine. He's, chief digital officer. But I digress. The point is that maybe we're at the table, but how am I continuing to improve my communication skills, my engagement skills to really enroll people in what we're doing, make them feel heard and seen, affect change of culture within an organization, which is very hard. It's very hard work, and it can often, you know, take difficult conversations to get there. Um, but those seemingly soft skills, I think personally, often make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's something as a physician that you kind of naturally develop with patient care.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but in many ways, I think when you're leading in a large health system or a startup, whatever you're doing, it's almost the approach on how to solve problems. Um, and so that's kind of, I think, where the leadership skills differentiate a little bit. When you solve a problem, there's kind of two ways to do it. There's some problems that are complicated but have a solution, and that takes a set of leadership skills and how to drive and solve for that. And then there's some problems that are nebulous and and aren't quite one solution oriented. And that adaptive nature that's required to navigate those problems, I think, is a large part of the leadership that you're talking about.
It's a great comment. We had a guest not too long ago, similar position, and we were talking about the fact that the same kind of motion, and in addition to that, the fact that, you know, I have a problem in front of me. If someone else has solved that problem already, how am I borrowing that experience such that I don't have to spend time solving this problem that someone in my, world has already solved? And then I'm focusing on the dynamic problem that you spoke to that maybe no one has solved yet, but we're making strides towards improving that experience or what have you, right?
Absolutely.
So Maruf, I know we got, I mean, I love this, right? I love, going where the conversation leads. I do want to spend a few minutes just letting everyone learn a little bit more about yourself and kind of
Sure.
how you started out and how you got to the point that you're at in your career today. I often find that these, stories of physicians kind of going into, you know, these roles are interesting and winding. So yeah, just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. It was a cold day in Michigan when I was born. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I started as a clinician um, did an internal medicine residency at University of Vermont. I did a chief resident year there. And I realized that like many of the hardest problems were not actual about the medical care. And I'm a hospitalist by background, and most of my hospitalist mentors in residency had another sort of niche or side gig, if you will, as part of their job. And so as I was going into it, I started kind of opening my eyes to what was around, and noticed that the problems, again, were not medical care, but they're really about systems and the enterprise and the organization, issues around that. And around that time, University of Vermont was implementing Epic, and I was in rooms where I was the only physician in that room. Most of the physicians during that time were not interested or couldn't be bothered with the workflows and the retooling of things to satisfy patient care with the EMR. And I truly enjoyed those problems, answering those questions. I answered questions at that time that I probably shouldn't have answered for surgeons and anesthesiologists. But it kind of perked my ears to, hey, it's something I like. It's a place where physicians aren't yet. And so when we moved, because my wife did a fellowship, and I started working as a hospitalist, I started volunteering for a lot of committees where I met leaders and mentors. And I eventually got pulled towards leadership in informatics and strategy. And I remember the moment that I had to decide to pivot my time from majority clinical to leadership and IT. That was difficult. It was a difficult decision. We talked about burnout in the patient care, and that was definitely maybe a part of it, but really it's an identity shift. And how do you maintain kind of that physician identity with a new role? And I don't know if you do. I think you kind of keep both. To this day, even though the majority of my time is in informatics and leadership, I don't call it work. I enjoy it. I have fun. It's awesome problems to solve. But when I see patients, I call that work, and it's a very small amount of my time now. But that just kind of gives you a lens into probably how folks like me think.
Well, and I appreciate that you still do see patients, right? Just because I feel like you can, in my experience, some of the leaders that I know that are physicians by background that still see patients, even if it's one day a week, virtually, whatever it might be, you're still kind of keeping your feet to the street, so to speak, right? Like as an informaticist or a digital leader or whatever the role might be, I'm looking to affect change for both the patient and my colleagues internally. Um, if I'm operating as one of those colleagues, effectively, I can really like drink my own champagne or,
Oh, champagne. I like
and
that.
the relating aspect. So my ability to relate to my colleagues and enroll them in things and things of that nature. I think it's unique for someone like yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's necessary from a whole lot of different viewpoints. I mean, I think it gives you clarity into what you described, into how colleagues, um, and office staff and all those folks deal with the daily grind. Um, but it also gives you connection to your community.
Right.
I mean, I honestly, like, it feels like extra work, but it isn't. It gives you clarity to what the patients want and need. Um, and it gives you, internal confidence and trust into the clarity of what problems you need to solve. But as
100%.
you talk about innovation, like before you start moving quickly, you got to be clear on the problem you want to solve. And I think that clarity builds trust,
Agree.
and that
Anybody
trust
who's
creates alignment. And alignment necessarily isn't 100% agreement when we innovate on things or change processes, but that clarity is, I think, a high dependency to success.
that makes sense. That totally resonates with me. Mhm. There's a concept it reminds me of that Gene Kim talks about in his book, Wiring the Winning Organization, called slowification.
Yeah.
Similar concept for anybody who's interested in exploring that further. So no, this is great, Marib. I mean, one question I'd have for you is over the course of your journey, as a physician, hospitalist, moving into these roles and so on. What's one of the most important things that you learned over the course of your journey?
Yeah, so many things. Um, yeah, I think the most important is probably be authentic. Like be authentic to yourself and others. Ideas shift, approaches shift. And you have to do that depending on the environment that you're in and the issue you're dealing with or the people you're working with. But speak up. Speak your truth. It's not going to hurt you in the end. I think a lot of folks who start off early in their careers don't necessarily say what they're thinking in a timely way, or in my case, I feel like I was, quote, being respectful in a lot of ways, and maybe wasn't heard, you know, didn't raise my voice to the level it needed. And that was an internal barrier more than an external barrier, for the most times. And you'll figure out your external environment the quicker you speak up. It comes down to that clarity, creating clarity. How do you do that?
That makes sense. It's funny. It took me many years to grow into my authentic self.
I'm still doing that.
I think for me too, it's like a level of comfortability with like not everyone has to like me. This is me. This is how I show up. I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna try to take the next best action. If that resonates or you identify with that, great. If not, like that's okay too, and I'm gonna be okay. And formerly, I think my actions could have a tendency to be driven by fear, which when you talk about,
Mhm.
the not speaking up, um, in my experience, it can be driven by fear, right? Fear of failure, fear of, you know, any type of imposter syndrome, right? And like, I identify with that, like early in my career, for example, or early in starting disruptive innovation. So call it like 8, 9 years ago, like we didn't have any clients, or we had one big client and then we were trying to like exist. So bring on more clients. We ended up onboarding one of the largest funeral home and cemetery companies in the country.
All right.
It's a big deal, and like newish company taking a flyer on us, but like and we could deliver, and we did. Total cluster fuck of a project, let me tell you.
It's a contract to die for right there.
It was.
I had to say it. I had to say it.
Wow, what a dad joke. I hope that's one of the pieces we pull for the excerpts. Crawling through ceiling dust, because like these cemetery and funeral home properties, they have like thick cement walls in some cases, and we're doing everything from like their rewiring of the buildings, a new wide area network, full unified communication suite, like everything from soup to nuts from the ground up. And they would dictate these timelines or give too much autonomy to field locations, or do these certain things that I knew were either not possible or not a best practice or whatever. And I didn't speak up. I was just like, okay, we'll get it done. And I would shake
Yeah.
my head, and then we would undoubtedly run into a wall, and they would be like, what the fuck? And we'd be like, yeah, like, we'll keep going. Like, it'll be another couple months, but we'll get it done. And we just kept going that way. And I mean, it was a shame. I mean, but like I learned so much, right? And
Yeah.
that said though, like if I was in the same position again, starting a business again at that point in my life, like sometimes you don't necessarily have the luxury of speaking up, or I guess you could, but I don't know. I don't know. I think it
I,
takes what it takes to learn these lessons, I guess is what I'm saying.
it definitely is a journey. And you know, maybe I'm an only child. I'm product of South Asian immigrants. Maybe it's partly how the culture that I grew up in. But you got to, like, you know, you started a company, you got a first client, you trusted your instincts, and this client trusted your judgment. Otherwise, they wouldn't have hired you. And so part of that is you can't wait for direction. You know, you got to share your thinking, even if it's not perfect, and really trust your instinct. Like,
And
I
know
think
what it
that's one of
is
the other
too?
lessons.
Like the uncomfortable conversations too.
That's what it is. And
Like I
it's
was
not,
afraid to
it's a
have the
mindset shift,
uncomfortable.
right? It's not, it, it can be discomfort, but it's like a healthy debate. And it's leaning in and contribute. And when you have a client, that's what they want. Like, if they've hired you, they trust you. You have to at least feel that.
Know what I
Um,
love starting with too, that I've learned is a really useful like jumping off point for these types of conversations. So let's say we're in the same position. COO is saying, all right, David, we need this done in 2 months. And I know that it like full stop, the quickest we could get it done is in 3 months. I go to the COO and I say, hey, John, I hear you. I mean, there's some incredible urgency around this. Help me understand how you're arriving at 2 months.
yeah.
And just shut up, right? And like the help me understand, I think is just like a great like loaded kind of like a way of being like, okay, like yeah, let me understand how you're arriving there. And then the other thing that I've used a lot, and Dr. Erskine and Alistair actually coached me on this, a couple of years ago. When I'm delivering uncomfortable feedback to a peer or an executive, how can I like weave in some things that they're doing really well? So I'm like, hey, Maruf, like, I mean, you're an amazing physician. Like you're killing it with this digital stuff. But like, I need you to like stop stealing the cookies from the cafeteria. Like it's
I do
really
like
like
cookies. I do like cookies.
problematic. But like you're saying the thing, you're complimentary and honest about the things that are working well, and then you're delivering honest feedback. But I think you're right. I think it's about a mindset shift. I mean, I like the way that you
And,
phrase that.
and it's easy to say, and when you're sort of just arriving or learning how to be yourself, it's tough to do. But I think you got to keep on surrounding yourself with people who support that. And really it's about, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I've been starting to tell her, what's your first thought? And what I'm trying to do there is telling her to trust her instincts. And success to me is when she says it back to me. The other day, we are deciding where to go to dinner, and she's like, "What's your first thought, Dad?" I like, good.
This brings me to like kind of another question I'd be curious about, because we're talking about perspective shifts. In my experience, some of the more dramatic perspective shifts that I've had over the course of my lifetime have often come from like not so seemingly not so great moments where I ultimately took away a profound lesson. Merck, can you think back on a time over the course of your journey, right, at any point that you had either a project fail or a personal hardship or just something that you had to walk through, but ultimately you took away a profound lesson?
Yeah, my biggest challenges have always come during periods of transition. So whether it's kind of moving from being a kind of a worker, individual contributor to being a leader, or stepping into a new role or a new organization. Um, and a lot of times those transitions can feel um, disappointing or maybe not what you wanted or scary, depending. And what I've learned is that transition doesn't really take away your identity at all. It clarifies it. It gives you a moment to be intentional and really reflect on what you want to be and who you want to be and who you want to be with. I think it works from a personal standpoint and a work standpoint. Each transition um, teaches you a lesson too, because I think particularly with work, what got you into a role may not be what sustains you in that role. So you have to reflect on, okay, how am I going to be successful? What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? And I think for me, those periods have been the biggest sense of learning and the biggest challenge, because you don't necessarily figure that out during the
Right.
transition, right? You reflect later and go, oh, that was a good moment for me. But at the time, you either have lost an identity, you felt like a failure, or you're just scared at being there and have an imposter syndrome, right? Like all of those transitions create these moments. And the closer you can be in that moment to be who you are and like raise your voice and focus on what you want to work on, the better it'll be. So I'm being a little generic here, but I think it's really about the transition, even in life. Me and my wife um, had trouble having children, and while most of our friends and family were having them, and so how do you show up for them? How do you show up for yourself? I think during that process, me and my wife became stronger, um, and and I think also when I left organizations, that also was a big identity shift for me. Um, what it allowed me to really ask myself who I was as a person, as a leader, what I wanted to work on. It helps you narrow your focus. It also gives you a little stronger voice when you go to your new role. Um, and in many ways, you can also, when you're in a new place that's uncomfortable, you actually get to see people, colleagues who have going through it like you did, and you actually get some clarity into like, oh, I made that mistake too. So it lets you lead them out of that tumultuous time, um, and lets you kind of just be a good person to those folks going through it. Lets you share the pain, so to speak. I think it makes you a leader.
That is huge. I mean, being able to leverage my experience to be in service to others, I think is one of just the coolest things that I get to do, um, be it personally, professionally, or otherwise. So that really resonates. And the other thing that I forgot about before was Brene Brown. I don't know if you've ever read any of Brene Brown's books, but she's wrote this book, Dare to Lead, Courage to Change. I mean, the concepts that she talks about, for anyone who's interested, very relevant to all of this. So, quick plug for Brene Brown. But I actually, it's a good transition, Maruf. I want to ask you quickly about your favorite book or literary piece, either that you've been reading recently or like one that just is like an all-time favorite, your choice.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll talk about what I'm reading now, um, and it might be a reflection of more maybe my personality. I'm reading like 3 books at the same time. Um, one is called Good Inside. It's actually about parenting,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Somebody mentioned that one to me.
the lesson is good for parenting, but I think it's actually good for leading and things like that. It, it's basically it treats a child's emotional behavior as communication, like not necessarily a failure. Like, so if a child has a um, disruptive
Tantrum.
meltdown or tantrum, it's really a signal to how they're feeling. And so you have to regulate to influence their behavior change. It's like you have to say you're a good kid instead of like, why are you yelling? Right.
Right.
Or don't throw a tantrum. People can hear you. You have to acknowledge that developing brain that they're giving you a
Right.
signal. You can't you can't attribute adult mistakes on that child. You can't debug humans when the system's in panic mode if you want to bring it to an organizational level. Like
Right.
that psychological safety is a prerequisite for performance kind of vibe. Um, so that's one. I'm reading the Creativity Code, um, which is about AI, and it talks about whether machines can truly be creative, um, or if they're just taking what they know about existing human imagination and just mixing it into something else. So it's kind of cool because it blends AI, art, philosophy, and really explores creativity.
Super cool.
So that's a good book to read. I think the message that I got from that is that AI can scale, and it can scale lots of different things, but as humans, we get to set the context, the direction, and that might be a way to approach AI as you move forward. And the third book I'm reading is kind of like a mindless. Well, it's not mindless, but it's fiction. It's called Dungeon Crawler Carl. Um, it's kind of an absurd but surprisingly insightful, dark survival story. Is how I describe it. Kind of presented as a video game point of view, video game like apocalypse now kind of thing. Um, but the lesson that I'm getting from that is, um, you know, like when a system is rigged to be a certain way, adaptability beats like outrage. Like, don't confuse the game with your mission, kind of thing. Um, so those are the 3 that I'm reading. One about parenting, one about technology and work, and one, because it sounds like a video game and is so absurd but awesome.
But it's funny how like you related the parenting book to leadership, which I totally agree with. And on top of it, what it reminds me is a lot of the ways that I either used to show up or the ways that I'm still working on today that I show up were a product of my childhood,
Yeah.
the
Oh,
way that I grew up, like my formative years and how I was spoke to, the environment that I existed in, uh, like very much the ways of being that I experienced as a 38-year-old man, right? Were crafted then. Now I've spent years rewiring and, you know, making strides at like trying to be the best version of myself. And always a work in progress, right? So the point of all that is just saying that like it, it it's been incredibly relevant to my leadership and my effectiveness as a digital consultant. As counterintuitive as that may seem to whoever, right? Like the, the biggest strides that I made as a leader and as a, effective advisor or what have you were due to my personal growth.
yeah. Yeah. And I feel like when you're not at your best, like when you're tired or when you've gone through something difficult, you tend to revert to your earlier ways.
Oh yeah. Oh
And so
yeah.
it's figuring out in real time to recognize that and then, change to what's needed.
And you know what I've always what I've also, you know, learned to appreciate is like if I so like you mentioned the tantrum example before, right? Kid has a tantrum, like don't have a tantrum or like why are you freaking out? Like
Yeah.
like quiet down. Very much my first reaction, right? As opposed to like, do you want a hug? Like,
Yeah.
I'm here for you. Like, of course you're upset. Like, I get upset too when, things don't happen a certain way. So that relatable, ride it out and like come from the positive as opposed to the don't or no.
Yeah.
It was something I had to learn. Um,
It seems so obvious when you say it, but it's so hard in the moment. It's having a tantrum about a tantrum, and that's not good.
right,
It's reading that
right,
signal. What does that signal mean? Right?
right.
And adapting to that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's relevant and to business as well. Like how am I reactionary or am I like, do I have that first thought and then pause and then take because sometimes the right action is no action in the moment. I
Mhm.
have to take a step back and go,
Right. You
iterate or
you gotta
whatever it
sort
might be.
yourself out and then come back, which is also a
Exactly.
lesson, right? Like, that's
And
teaching resilience.
exactly. And the last thing I'll say is like, let's say that I do have that reaction. What I've also learned is I can apologize. Like
Yes.
no one ever apologized to me. Like that
Ri
wasn't like a thing. But I can go to my daughter or my colleague or whatever and be like, listen, I don't like the way that I spoke to you. That wasn't cool. I'm gonna do better next time and I'm sorry for that, or whatever
Absolutely.
whatever the dialogue might be. But anyway, but I do think this is relevant to leadership. So I appreciate that we're talking about it. And Maruf, now you're in your role in Carilion Clinic, kind of guiding this clinical and digital strategy. Talk to me a little bit in the time that we have left about your vision. I mean, we kind of touched on it earlier, but like your vision based on the overarching mission of the organization and maybe some of the key initiatives that you guys are working on.
Yeah, I'll start off with, kind of the secret sauce. Like, Carilion is in Southwest Virginia, um, kind of beautiful mountains everywhere. Their secret sauce is really about their commitment to the community in that area. And I think, you can expand like healthcare in general, people who work in healthcare and at healthcare organizations. they're smart, committed people who deeply care for their community. So that's, I want to acknowledge that every healthcare system, whatever their margin is, whatever is happening, there are smart people in healthcare. And that commitment is deep. And so I want to applaud folks for being in that environment. But really the vision is, what would it look like? I'll answer with a question maybe, to describe the vision is, like, what would it look like if we had less friction, high psychological safety, and change didn't feel disruptive, but inevitable? Like what would an extreme people-centered enterprise looks like? And I'm not trying to discount the community commitment, but if you pivot and ask those questions, that's really what I want for my organization, but really all healthcare organizations. We need to work together to do that. I think, I'm describing behaviors and mindsets, but I think that really sets the organization up to do whatever it needs to do with whatever, issue comes along, whatever headwind we face. So
Right.
that's really what I want. I mean, I think, with the financial headwinds of the next kind of 10 years of awesome technology, coming, we have to be ready to do that. You have to have a behavior, mindset, organizational culture to deal with it. So that's really, it's not a technology vision is what I described, but it really sets you up to leverage technology and other tools in the best way. My vision is if technology wasn't really even, mentioned per se, like that change of technology was in the background and people just focused on what they were there to do.
Right. Yeah. Rachel Lockett will often say the technology works,
Yes.
um, which, is debatable, but like, it's true. Like if I build a technology solution to its maximum resiliency, like oftentimes it will work, and it's about focusing on exactly what you're talking about, right?
Right.
That's the point. What about challenges that you guys are facing as an organization? I mean, you mentioned kind of the financial headwinds. Is that a challenge, or what other challenges are you guys facing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's also fear of the unknown. The financial headwinds we know are coming. Like to what degree, severity, or the character of it is still in question, right? And I don't think that will change. I think, staffing along with that is part of it. And just these talk about transitions as a personal issue. These are big transitions for organizations. And so keeping focus on what's important is a big challenge, right? Kind of that perfection mindset versus a progress mindset. Those are pitfalls that an organization and people can fall into. And I also think I mentioned that inflection point with technology and information. I mean, that is a big challenge, I think. The notion that technology can solve everything in a vacuum is not accurate. We have to be a resilient workforce and have a strong mindset to leverage what we have and deal what we have. I think kind of narrowing down the solution, again, coming back to that clarity of what problem are we trying to solve right now, and let's go for it without a perfectionist mindset is the challenge. I think my organization is also to asking those questions about, how can we scale more? How can we provide a similar seamless experience to our patients and our staff? And so it's that focus in the setting of these kind of scary environments.
Right. And it's actually a good transition to, one of my last questions, which would be, with the acknowledgement that you don't have a crystal ball, what do you think will be some of the biggest changes or that you aspire to change in the future of healthcare or as time passes?
Yeah. So obviously AI is the word, right? But I don't think the differentiator will be algorithms. Like it'll come back to trust. Like again, financial pressure, change is accelerating. Uh, I think the systems that stick out to folks will be the ones that they believe in. Where clinicians, staff, operational folks trust the data that they're receiving. People trust the recommendations, from their institution and not just their LLM. And leaders trust the decisions being made, right, across the organization. So I think you have to create an environment where trust is the North Star. And so what you adapt from a technology standpoint, maybe more importantly, what you don't adopt, will create trust. For example, if we're going in a technology example, adopting an AI model that doesn't that's allowed to drift and doesn't get changed or doesn't get augmented or doesn't have the right governance around it, like that erodes trust, and you can't do that.
Right. Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, Maruf, this has been great, man. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Last question I have for you would be, if you could go back 10, 15, 20 years in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. So much advice. I don't know if I'd listen though. That's not,
Buy Amazon, right?
buy Amazon. Don't eat that piece of cake. Work out more. Now, I think, again, progress over perfection. I mentioned that earlier. I think that is a key mantra to have. Embrace mistakes of yourself and from others. Treat them as learning. Really think about those mistakes as learning. Pitfalls, these pitfalls that we learn from, build resilience in yourself and your teams. Build your teams that way. Build them for resilience, trust, and progress.
Love that.
And also, we talk about patient-centered, people-centered. I think that's also, however you need to do that to connect with that concept. I think people-centered to me is more my choice than saying patient-centered, because it encompasses the people you work with and the people you care for. So people-centered in the setting of those mindsets are important.
Love it. Yeah, Maruf, thank you again. This has been great. So appreciate you taking the time so much.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's great.
And to our listeners, thank you guys all for tuning in. We'll catch you all next week.